You are listening to Torah in 7, a podcast by Lubavitch International where we explore the story behind the story of the weekly Torah reading in 7 minutes. I'm your host, Bela Olidort, and before we begin, I should say that in these podcasts where I draw a lot of inspiration from Chabad Hasidic thought, I am guided by the principle that the text never departs from its literal meaning. First, a brief summary. This week continues the dramatic arc of Yosef's story. Paro summons Yosef from prison to interpret his dreams. Yosef predicts 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine and proposes a national storage plan. Impressed, Paro elevates him from prisoner to viceroy. Yosef marries and has 2 sons, Menashe and Ephraim. When famine spreads, Yosef's brothers come to Egypt for food, unaware that the powerful Egyptian official is the brother they sold. But Joseph recognizes them. He accuses them of spying, imprisons Shimon, and demands that they bring Binyamin next time. When the family runs out of food again, they must return. Yaakov at first refuses to send Binyamin, his only remaining child, from Rachel. But as the hunger worsens, he has no choice. The parsha ends with Yosef framing Binyamin, planting his silver goblet in Binyamin's sack, and threatening to keep him prisoner. Today I want to ask, what do we learn from Yosef about life after trauma? And to answer that question, I want to unpack a word that haunts the Yosef story, a word that carries the full weight of this loss. The word is einenu, he is not. The first time we read this word in relation to Yosef is last week when Reuven returns to the pit to rescue him and discovers that he's not there. He cries, Hayeled einenu, the boy is not. It appears again and again in reference to Yosef's absence. When the brothers arrive in Egypt and Yosef, now viceroy, accuses them of spying, they defend themselves. We are 12 brothers, they say, and one is no more, einenu. They don't use his name. They don't say he died. They don't say he's lost. They say einenu, he is not. And when Yaakov speaks of Yosef, he too says einenu. Torn from his family and home, sold into slavery, Yosef is the first exile. His descent into Egypt initiates the descent of all his brothers, the 70 souls, and eventually the enslavement of the entire Jewish people. Yosef's einenu then becomes the template for our exile. For Yaakov, there is no closure in Yosef's einenu. Last week, we saw that he refused to be consoled, and generations later, the prophet Yirmiyahu brings Yosef's mother into the picture, telling us that Rachel, too, refuses to be consoled. Rachel weeps for her children, and me'ana lehinachem, she refuses to be comforted as her children go into exile, ki einenu, because they are not. This is the grief of Yosef's parents over his einenu. But what about Yosef himself? What has happened to Yosef, the favorite son with dreams of greatness, the Yosef who lost his coat, his status, his innocence, his family, his language, even his name? That Yosef is truly gone. And with every loss, another layer of his old self is peeled away until einenu, his old self, is no more. This point is made clear in a midrash about an exchange of great tenderness between Yosef and Binyamin. When Yosef finally sees Binyamin after 2 decades, says the midrash, he asks him, "Have you a brother of the same mother?" Binyamin, who still has no idea that standing before him is his brother, replies, "I had a brother, but I know not where he is." Yosef asks, "Have you any sons?" "I have 10, answers Binyamin. And Yosef asks for their names and their meanings. Binyamin says, "They all refer to my brother and the troubles that befell him." And he begins to name them. Bela, because he was swallowed up. Becher, because he was my mother's firstborn. Gera, because he became a stranger. And so on, each name a way for Binyamin to hold on to the brother who became einenu. And in a way it is literally true. The Yosef he is speaking to is not the Yosef who left. That Yosef has been replaced by Yosef the viceroy. The Yosef who speaks Egyptian, dresses Egyptian, carries an Egyptian name, has an Egyptian wife and children. He's a stranger. But here's an important detail. Yosef didn't just lose his identity. It wasn't a passive loss. He chose to be released of the memories, of the pain of persecution, of suffering as an identity. He doesn't define himself as a victim of his brothers or of circumstance. In fact, he names his firstborn Menashe, reflecting a kind of willful forgetting, for it means, God has made me forget all my hardship, he says. By releasing his hold on the past, he sheds his old self. The word einenu comes from ayin, often translated as nothingness. In Hasidic thought, ayin is egolessness, the surrender of the rigid, defended I. It is letting go of the identity that imprisons you. And isn't it fascinating that the letters of ayin, Aleph, Yud, Nun, which is the absence of self, are the same, just rearranged, as in the word ani, I am? That, Kabbalah teaches us, is to tell us that to reach the true ani, your true self, you must first pass through ayin, through nothingness. You cannot become who you're meant to be while clinging to who you were. The old ani must dissolve into ayin before a new one can emerge. Yosef survives exile not by holding on to the past, but by becoming, in a sense, ayin, the egolessness that opens space for something new, for the divine to flow. This allows him not only to survive, but to thrive. And that becomes clear in the name he gives his second son, Ephraim, which, as he explains, means I have become fruitful in the land of my affliction. Next week in Parshat Vayigash, we'll see Yosef reveal his new identity to his brothers when he declares, Ani Yosef, I am Joseph. He has moved from Einenu, from Ayin to Ani, and showed us, the Jewish people destined for long exile, how to live. We are heirs to Yosef's reinvention. Exiled from place to place, persecuted repeatedly, the Jewish people not only survived trauma after trauma, we refuse to be defined by our losses. We move on from Einenu to Ayin and allow the divine to flow through us in the lands of our affliction, the lowly places we make holy. To be a survivor, to do the hard work of letting go, whether it's leaving an abusive relationship, a soul-crushing job, or a destructive addiction, is critical. It is a first and necessary step to processing the pain of loss and trauma. It is how we get to Einenu. But letting go is not enough. It's not an identity. To reach Ani, the survivor needs more than Menashe. They need Ephraim. And that is my takeaway from Parshat Miketz. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, comment, rate, and share. Shabbat Shalom.